A nameless man gets hit by a car and dies on the spot. He's later reincarnated as a sword in an alternate world. A sword seems to mount onto a pedestal in a fantasy world. He pulls out his menu to see his name and learns his name is an intelligent weapon. Furthermore, the sword goes through his skills and abilities. At that moment, a small pack of goblins tries to draw the sword out of its pedestal. Provoked by the goblins, the sword uses his telekinesis skill, with which he can move around, to slaughter 2 of them immediately. Meanwhile, when the sword attacks the goblin, he unknowingly slices a crystal inside one of the goblins, allowing him to absorb its power. When all of the goblins are killed, the sword opens up his menu again to see the new things in his stats menu. Realizing that he can absorb skills from his defeated enemies, the sword hears a voice notifying him that he has 10 skill slots available and asking if he wants to equip any. Meanwhile, the sword uses digging skills to bury the goblins' corpses. The sword then stands back into its sword mount. Afterward, the sword looks forward to absorbing more crystals and gaining new skills to become more vital for his master, who will wield him. Elsewhere, a young cat girl lives a life of misery while working under slave traders who have enslaved people. When her master scolds her, she notes her desire to become stronger. Afterward, the sword uses his telekinesis skill to fly into the air for 3 minutes as his MP runs out within that time. Meanwhile, the sword encounters an air floater, which he tries to kill instantly, but the monster constricts him with its tentacles and drains his MP. The sword slices through the air floater's tentacles and immediately slays the monster, thereby absorbing its crystal. The sword absorbs the skill called Float. Float skill, combined with his telekinesis skill, allows him to fly for 5 times longer, and he gets free fall skill to slay another monster. After that, the sword is notified that his abilities have evolved, and he gets 10 evolution points. On the same evening, the sword locates a cave where goblins live. Inside the cave, the sword, using his stealth skill, discovers the Goblin King surrounded by other goblins. The sword instantly kills the Goblin King using his telekinesis catapult attack and then proceeds to kill the rest of the goblins, gaining fire magic skill. Meanwhile, the master of Black Cat Girl scolds another servant. The Black Cat Girl tries to protect another enslaved person from him, but the master orders her to stand down. She's scolded and not allowed any dinner that night because of her insubordination. The following morning, the slave trader chastises the Black Cat Girl. She, in turn, grasps a stone and tries to punish him, only to be ordered down to the ground by the master. The neckband of the enslaved people makes them incapable of refusing any orders given to them, irrespective of how unreasonable they may be. The sword, back on his pedestal, notices that the further he goes from the place he was reincarnated in, the more powerful monsters he meets. But it also gives him the advantage of acquiring more influential powers. The locations are divided into areas, the highest being 5. When the sword handles all of the monsters in Area 4, the sword challenges the southern Area 5 boss, a glutinous slime. The sword defeats it by combining his telekinesis catapult and wind shooter skills, which he calls Heavenly Slash. The sword then uses Pocket Dimension, which immediately stores the glutinous slime's corpse. Afterward, the sword fights with Eastern Boss, the Doppel Snake, and then faces off against Area 5's northern boss, a Blast Turtle. He defeats the Blast Turtle with an Earth Wall and Heavenly Slash, and gains 2 new abilities. The next day, the sword faces off against the Western boss, Tyrant Sabertooth. After defeating the monster, the sword evolves again, gaining new stats. However, when he arrives in the Wilted Forest and tries to take a rest, he realizes that he has gotten stuck in the mud and can't use any of his powers. During his month-long stay there, he cries out for someone to rescue him. Meanwhile, in the carriages, the servant master crosses the Wilted Forest that carries their luggage and the enslaved cat people. During the rain, they realize a bloodthirsty 2-headed bear is following them. The beast tosses the carriage aside, forcing the people to come out of it. The master orders servants to stay in their place so they can run away when the beast hunts the others. Due to neckbands, servants are stuck in their place. However, when the master tries to flee, he is caught by the two-headed bear, and the beast crushes him on the spot. After his death, the cat people are free to run to save their lives. The beast begins to kill them, one after another. Luckily, the cat girl sees the magical sword stuck in the mud. She holds the sword and realizes they can communicate using telepathy. The sword asks the cat girl to take him out and use him to fight back. Then the sword uses telekinesis to take her well beyond the beast's reach. After acquiring abilities like sword magic, sword art, and firepower, by skill sharing, the young cat girl fights against the beast with the magic sword in her hand. She effortlessly manages to kill the beast. After killing the two-headed bear, the young cat girl expresses her gratitude, and the sword expresses his desire to go along with the girl. However, one of the humans surviving the massacre by running away arrives and asks her to give him the sword. When she refuses, he gives her an order and shows the slave contract to her to remind her that she will always have to follow his orders. The sword uses telekinesis and firepower to burn the contract itself, which frees the cat girl from her life of enslavement immediately. It turns out that the girl's name is Fran, and she starts calling the sword Teacher after learning that he doesn't have a name. Furthermore, she also agrees with his request to become his true wielder from that day onward. Fran's parents wanted to evolve desperately. Despite overexerting themselves, they never achieved their goal and died. Now, Fran plans to turn her parents' dreams into reality. After killing a group of goblins, Fran uses water magic to clean herself off and then teach her. Fran then hears something and rushes there. Meanwhile, Randell the adventurer is trapped by goblins and struggles to defend himself. The black cat girl comes across him and does not think twice about immediately springing into action. She slaughters them, one after another, through sword art or a blade skill. She eventually manages to save Randell without any injuries. The teacher instructs Fran not to tell Randell about his communication skill. Randell offers Fran that he can give her a ride to Alessa town for free, as he realizes that she can be helpful and offer him protection. But Fran apprehends Randell's intentions with the help of the sword. En route to their destination, Randell tells Fran about the rise in monster encounters within the Great Wolf Plain. Randell says a turf war might be occurring there, causing weaker monsters like goblins to take refuge by busy roads. Then Randell explains the monster ranking system and the adventurers to her. The job immediately strikes her as attractive. Randell explains that Fran must register at the Adventurers Guild where she can sell her monster materials. Meanwhile, the wagon arrives in Alessa, and as Fran heads to the Adventurers Guild, Sword is surprised to see many weapons with superior stats. He begins to lose confidence. Then Fran cheers the teacher by praising him, which lightens up his spirits. At the guild, the receptionist, Nell, struggles to keep up the act of a smiling receptionist while dealing with the uncivilized behavior of the adventurers. Fran then approaches Nell and asks to register as an adventurer. Nell believes Fran to be unfit to be an adventurer, but still allows her to take the mock fight exam. Meanwhile, the people in the Adventurers Guild who saw the Black Cat Girl register for the exam believe that she won't last long in the test. In the arena, Examiner Donadron introduces himself to Fran with a loud voice, using his intimidation skill. However, Fran is undisturbed by Donadron's showing off. The teacher casts Identity on Donadron, shocked by noticing that Donadron is much strong. At the start of the fight, Fran dodges Donadron's attack, who is impressed by her presence of mind. Fran has trouble defending herself against Donadron's attacks, so the teacher casts support buffs on her, making her STR and AGL increase. With the buffs and the combination of earth and fire magic, Fran tries to defeat the examiner. Then she casts a Dragon Fang attack, which Donadron does not resist. After that, the test is finished, with the examiner buried under rubble. Meanwhile, Nell is shocked, as she believes using the sword and magic spell simultaneously would require 2 brains. By defeating Donadron, Fran passes the exam. Afterward, Fran, accompanied by Donadron, meets the Guildmaster Klimt in his office. Klimt tries to learn from Fran where she discovered her sword skills and spells, but following the teacher's advice, refuses to answer. Then Klimt tries to use identity on Fran, but cannot due to teacher's identity protection. Klimt assures Fran that she has passed. The teacher then casts identity on Klimt and learns his impressive stats and skills. Just then, Nell enters the room and informs him that everything is in order. Klimt asks Nell to issue a guild card to Fran. Fran records her mana signature on the crystal and then chooses her class as Spell Sword. Afterward, Nell hands over Fran her guild card. At the receptionist's desk, Fran takes out some of her monster materials and the monster she has slaughtered to earn herself a profit of 195k gold. As Fran tries to leave, a quartet of adventurers tries to steal her money from Fran, but Nell intervenes and disparages the group. One of the members tries to attack Nell, but Fran saves her, and the teacher suggests they take the fight outside. However, the adventurers block the way. One of the adventurers mocks Fran as being from the Black Cat tribe, which triggers her and makes her slice off the adventurer's feet. She then takes out the remaining adventurers with oscillation. After that, Fran leaves the guild, but a dwarf uses God's sight on teacher to deduce that he's an intelligence weapon. Fran passes through the shops on Alyssa's streets to find a defensive weapon for herself. Meanwhile, she encounters a dwarf. The sword uses an appraisal eye on the dwarf and learns his name is Goraz. The sword also comes out with Goraz's unique skill, God's Sight. The dwarf invites Fran to visit his store, and Fran agrees. When they are heading to the shop, some adventurers whisper that Goraz will waste his armor if he sells it to Fran. Goraz tells Fran not to consider them, as they are mischiefs who want to resell Goraz's stuff. When Fran asks why he wants to sell his armor to her, Goraz answers that he will sell his wares to someone with extraordinary abilities. Goraz shows Fran a complete set of armor from head to toe, costing 150k gold, as they are commissioned by someone who failed to return from the dungeon. Meanwhile, the sword sees around the store and discovers that every armor here has more incredible stats than him. When Fran asks Goraz to show her his sword, he immediately calls the sword name that Fran has wielded. The teacher gets shocked as he can block the appraisal eye, but Goraz is equipped with God's Sight, which can see the stats even when the appraisal eye is blocked. Meanwhile, the sword uses telepathy and says that Goraz already has much armor with high skills. Considering Goraz a good person, the sword starts to communicate with him. When they talk about the ATK sword in Goraz's shop, Goraz begins to explain mana conductivity. After looking at the teacher's stats, he finds out that the sword's mana conductivity is grade A. Goraz tells Fran to invest 100 mana and wield the sword. The teacher slices off the ATK sword into two. Goraz further explains that the sword has 200% conductivity, meaning that his mana increases to 200. Goraz agrees that the teacher is an influential magic sword. Goraz suggests that only the divine blacksmiths are capable of making special weapons that can tear the skies and lands apart. Goraz confesses he witnessed a legendary sword known as the Sword of Flames, Ignis. Meanwhile, the teacher asks Goraz to make him a sheath and takes out the material of rank C and rank D monsters, asking if Goraz can use them to make armor. Goraz gets excited about making high-quality weapons for Fran's adventures. Afterward, when Fran and the teacher wander the streets, the sword suggests buying some underclothing for her so she can fight effortlessly. Meanwhile, a shop owner calls her into the shop and shows her some of the underclothing. Fran tries other clothes too, and the shop owner relishes Fran's grace. After some time, Fran reaches the general store named Cybertooth, which she mistakes for a weapon store because of its interior. A giant man appears as the shop owner. The sword uses his appraisal eye on him and learns he is an intermediate adventurer named Rufus. After buying some groceries, Fran moves to find a hotel to live in. When she reaches the inn, the receptionist grants her a room regardless of age, as Fran has a guild card. Entering the room, Fran gets emotional, as she has not lived in any comfortable place before. The sword promises her that he will take care of her until she evolves. Then the teacher cooks fried chicken and curry for Fran. After filling her belly, they move for a meeting to make a strategy to become stronger. In Fran's room, the teacher asks her how they will use his skill points in the future. Fran wants recovery magic, which she can use through skill sharing. Meanwhile, Fran fell asleep. The next day, Fran, during training, hears a voice of battle and rushes towards it. Elsewhere, some adventurers are trapped by the horde of goblins. The teacher notices from above the mountain that goblins are 13 in number. Fran uses earth magic and heavy slash skills to assault many goblins. Then she uses her recovery magic to heal the adventurers. Adventurers tell Fran about the goblin stampede, which is in the form of a horde, and attack human territories for food. Meanwhile, the goblin calls for backup, and Fran goes to fight with them. She uses different skills and continuously levels up. Thanks for watching my anime recap. If you liked it, subscribe and give it a thumbs up. Don't forget to turn on notifications by clicking the bell icon so you don't miss future videos. Leave a comment and let me know what you thought of the recap. I hope to see you all in part 2 of the series.